week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1 Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So this week a great matchup at the Indianapolis Colts. Last week St. Brown had a monster game versus the Jaguars. He went for 161, found the end zone twice. And this week at Indianapolis, fast track, high scoring offense this is for Detroit. I believe will go out there once again, have a big performance. Number 2, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. His numbers have definitely taken a hit over the last 3 weeks. Here's Justin Jefferson, but this Minnesota Viking team still moving the football. They're still making plays. And this week at the Chicago Bears, I think he could go out there, have a nice game as Justin Jefferson. It just takes a couple of big plays for him to have a big day. And I still believe he's one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in all pro football overall. Number 3, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. So last week, 2 big touchdowns for Kupp, 6 for 106 and 2 touchdowns. And this week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles secondary that shut down elite receivers for the majority of the season. But this week, I think the matchup doesn't matter. Cooper Kupp, he could run all the routes. He's got great hands. And he was a Triple Crown winner for a reason over a few seasons ago, where him and Matthew Stafford are locked in. And it doesn't matter what defense he versus. As long as Kupp's healthy, we know he's still one of the top wide receivers in all pro football. Number 4, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Collins returned to the lineup last week for this Houston Texan team. They started off the game with an 80-yard screen that was a touchdown to Collins, but it got called back on an eligible player downfield. But Collins, he didn't play a lot of the snaps in that ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. They eased him in a little bit, and it was a blowout victory. But this week, with a healthy week under his belt and another practice week, I think Collins obviously will get more snaps. Him and CJ Stroud, they've been locked in since last season. And this week in a decent matchup versus the Titans, I think he goes out there, has a good game. Number 5, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. A.J. Brown, he's been locked in all season long. We know he missed a few games with the hamstring injury, but ever since he returned, this Eagle team has taken off, and they've won 6 in a row now. So this week in a potential high-scoring game at the Rams, where their secondary hasn't been good all season long, A.J. Brown, once again, a top 5 play. Number 6, Puka Nacua of Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua, he's been back from injury over the last few weeks, and he's looked great, Puka Nacua. Last week going over 120 yards, finding the end zone at the Patriots. This week could be a high-scoring game versus the Eagles. Like I said, though, their secondary has been stout, especially the last 6 weeks. But Puka Nacua, just like Cooper Kupp, he could do it all in this offense. Sean McVay puts these guys in great positions with the play calling. And this week versus Philadelphia, he's a great option. Number 7, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Mike Evans will be back in this ball game at the New York Giants. And this secondary can't stop anyone. And Baker Mayfield and Evans since last season have been one of the better 1-2 combos, quarterback to receiver, in all of the NFL. So Mike Evans, he could run the routes, he could burn you deep, he could run the seam. And obviously with Chris Godwin out for the season, the target's going to be there for Mike Evans, and he could have a field day this week in New York. Number 8, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, last couple weeks, he's been playing a little bit better for this Dolphin team, finding the end zone. Obviously not 100% with the wrist injury, but Miami, they're still putting up points, even though they've struggled this season. But we know Tua missed a ton of games, but the last 2 weeks they've won both games, and this week going for their 3rd in a row. So this week in a matchup versus a Patriot defense where Hill's had a lot of success against in his career, he's definitely a top 10 option. Number 9, George Pickens the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Pickens, he's been getting peppered with targets ever since Russell Wilson's been the starting quarterback over the last month of the season for this Steelers team. So this week, a pretty good matchup with the Cleveland Browns. Denzel Ward, he's banged up. We don't know 100% if he's going to play in this ball game. And George Pickens, like I said, he's getting a lot of targets. He's making big plays. And him and Russell Wilson are locked in right now. Number 10, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. He's easily the number 1 option in the passing game here, Zay Flowers. This week, not a great matchup at the Chargers, but we saw Jamar Chase and T. Higgins go out there and put up monster games at this secondary last week. So I think Zay Flowers, last week it was a down game, but he still found the end zone on that last drive. And this week at the Chargers, he's going to get more involved. And this Raven team knows they got to go out there and win this game, where right now they're fighting for a wild card spot after they lost that tough game to the Pittsburgh Steelers. 11, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. A scary Terry last week. It was a bad game versus a good secondary. Obviously, the Eagles, only 2 fantasy points. But this week, a great matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. They can't stop anyone. And we know McLaurin throughout his NFL career has had great success versus Cowboy teams. So this week, I think he goes out there, bounces back, has a good game. Number 12, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. Metcalf returned to the lineup last week for Seattle. and it was a decent showing for DK Metcalf. He left a couple points out there where there was one play on the sideline that if he stayed in and turned the corner, he might have been gone for a 60-plus yard touchdown. But this week versus Arizona, a secondary that's definitely improved over the last few weeks, but still DK Metcalf, I don't think they can match up with him in this ball game, and I think he goes out there and causes havoc. 13 Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants. So his numbers have definitely gone down for Malik Neighbors over the last 4 or 5 weeks. That concussion definitely did him in early in the season where he was on a roll the first month of the season. And now Tommy DeVito in their quarterback. So Tommy DeVito, in my opinion, can't be any worse than what Daniel Jones was for this Giant team. Not targeting Neighbors a lot early in ball games, and a lot of garbage time is where Neighbors was getting his points. So if Neighbors could get off to earlier starts like he was in the first month of the season, he definitely could move back up the ranking board. And this week, it's a good starting point versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where their secondary all season long hasn't stopped anyone. So I think Malik Neighbors could go out there with Tommy DeVito, and if they just could get a little bit rapport going early in that game, I think Neighbors could have a good one. 14 Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So JSN the last couple weeks, he's putting up some monster performances, and he's been a target machine and a yard after catch machine as well for the Seattle team. So him and Geno Smith, they're locked in right now. Tyler Lockett this season's definitely taken a back step, and he's a veteran. She is behind him, obviously. So now Jackson Smith, number 2 wide out in this receiving room, and this week could be a potential high-scoring game between these two division rivals. 15 Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So this Bronco offense, the last few weeks here, they're starting to put up points, and they're putting them up in bunches. And Courtland Sutton, the last month of the season, either he's had 100-yard games or he found the end zone. So this week in a great matchup with the Vegas Raiders that can't stop anyone, I think Courtland Sutton goes out there as a big game. Bo Nix has been targeting him a whole lot, and he's the number 1 option easily in this offense. 16 CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So obviously his numbers are going to take a hit with Dak Prescott out of the lineup, but last week he had a pretty solid game with CeeDee Lamb in that one, even though the Cowboys threw the football 50 times versus the Houston Texans. So this week at the Commanders, a team he's had success against in his career, CeeDee Lamb. But like I said, Dan Quinn's the head coach, and he knows how to cover this Cowboy offense, I believe. So this week, CeeDee Lamb, he's a middle of the pack, back end 1, number 2 receiver, I believe. 17 Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Yes, his numbers have gone down over the last few weeks, but he just has the knack for the end zone, and he's one of the better yard after catch wideouts in the league. So this week, San Francisco coming to town versus this Green Bay Packer team, and I think Jaden Reed, he could go out there, he could have a good ball game. I know last week he got that early touchdown, and then after that he was quiet, but like I said, him and Jordan Love are locked in, and he's easily the number 1 target in my opinion in this offense. 18 Jawan Jennings staying in the same game in the 49ers. So Jawan Jennings, arguably, he's been the best receiver all season long in the San Francisco offense. I know Brock Purdy's banged up day to day with the shoulder injury, but I believe he's going to play in this game. And Jawan Jennings last week, he had 25 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And going back early in the season as well, 175-yard, 3-touchdown day. So this week at Green Bay, a leaky secondary. I think he could go out there, have a good ball game. 19 Josh Downs to the Indianapolis Colts. So Downs last week, even with Anthony Richardson in their quarterback, where obviously he's had his struggles, he went out there, had a good game. This week they're going to be chasing points early and often, and I think a lot of garbage time points could be a thing here for Josh Downs in this game. So Downs, a speed receiver, he could run all the routes, and he's easily, in my opinion, the number 1 receiver over Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce for this Colt team. 20 Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. So Calvin Ridley, it's been a solid last few weeks for him, where him and Will Levis are starting to get on the same page, and it just needs to be a DeAndre Hopkins trade for targets to open up and Calvin Ridley to be more comfortable as a number 1 wide receiver, where last season in Jacksonville he was operating as a number 1 wide receiver in terms of lining up in the offense. So this week, ball game, they're going to be trailing early and often to Houston. They're going to get a lot of throws, a lot of targets to Ridley, I believe. I think he could put in a decent performance. 21 Marvin Harrison of the Arizona Cardinals. So Marvin Harrison, it's been an up and down rookie season, and rightfully so, but this offense has been great over the last few weeks. But in my opinion, he's the number 2 option in the passing game behind Trey McBride is Marvin Harrison, which is fine. But this week at Seattle, a secondary that's had a lot of trouble defending wide receivers all season long, I think Marvin Harrison could go out there and have a big game, and we've seen him have some big games this season. So this week, coming off a bye, rookies get into the playbook even more, even though I know he's been a starter since week 1, is Harrison, and I think he goes out there and is a good game. 22 Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo Samuel, we know he's a good wide receiver, but his numbers are definitely taking a hit this season. And obviously injuries have been a concern this season as well. But now with everyone back, George Kittle should be back in this ball game. I think Deebo Samuel could have a good game. And in these big type of games where their backs been against the wall over the last few seasons, Deebo has usually risen to the occasion. So this week at Green Bay, I believe he will and have a decent performance. 23, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Devonta Smith, he's been a big bust for the most part this season. There's been a couple big games for Smith. We know he's the ultimate boom or bust type of wideout. Either he has a monster game or he goes out there and has a game with 2 catches, 25 yards. So this week at the Rams, indoor track, obviously, this is going to be a high-scoring game, I believe. I think Devonta Smith bounces back, has a good game. 24, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So Williams, he's added another element this season where he came into the year for the first time, not suspended and healthy, even though he did get suspended a few weeks ago, 2 games for PED. So Jameson Williams, we know he's that speed wide receiver where if you can hit him on a slant route like last week, and he took a 20-yard route to the end zone for a 60-yard route. So his speed is up there amongst the top wide receivers in speed in the NFL. And he's in a great offense where he's getting that single coverage with Amon-Ra St. Brown getting the attention and Sam Laporta and these running backs getting the attention. Where Williams can roam with the one-on-one coverage. And this week on the fast track at Indianapolis, I think once again there's a good possibility he has a long touchdown. 25, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Ladd McConkey, the last couple weeks, he's starting to come in his own as the number 1 option in this passing game for this Los Angeles Charger team. So Justin Herbert, he's getting more comfortable as the weeks have went on in this offense, where it's been a total at the wide receiver position where Keenan Allen's gone, Mike Williams is gone, and Ladd McConkey they drafted, and Quentin Johnson they drafted last season was this Los Angeles Charger team. So right now, Ladd McConkey, he's going out there. He's making plays for this Los Angeles Charger team. But some weeks are going to be good weeks and some weeks inconsistent. So this week versus the Baltimore Ravens, I think is the number 3 wide receiver flex option is where McConkey will really obviously have some value. He easily could have a top 15 performance, but this week I think Baltimore is going to zero in on him all game after coming off 100 yards last week versus Cincinnati. 26, Jerry Jeudy of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerry Jeudy, it's been a pretty decent season, I think, for him with this Cleveland Brown team. Last week he had a big game, including an 89-yard touchdown. This week a tougher matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they're one of the better defenses in the league. But when you got a quarterback like Jameis Winston, who's going to keep throwing that football down the field, trying to stretch it out, you're going to work into some big plays at times, and that's exactly been the case here with Jerry Jeudy. Last season, even too much at all with Russell Wilson in Denver. Denver got rid of him, and now he's found a home with this Cleveland Brown team, and over the last few weeks, he's putting up numbers. So this week, I believe he could be a decent flex option for fantasy owners. 27, DeAndre Hopkins, Kansas City Chiefs. I know the last 2 weeks, the numbers have dropped off here for Hopkins, but still, there's not really a real threat at the wide receiver position to Hopkins. I know Xavier Worthy had a decent game last week, but he's not a true number 1. And Juju Smith-Schuster returned to the lineup, but we didn't see much. So this week in a great matchup at the Carolina Panthers that can't stop anyone. I think Hopkins could go out there and have one of his better games as a Chief this season. 28, Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. Tank Dell last week, it wasn't a great game for him, but he's the number 2 option now in the passing game with Nico Collins back. It opens everything up, and they're going to be running the same offense like they did last season is this Houston Texan team. We know Diggs is out for the season, but last year they had the same offense besides Joe Mixon, and now they could go anywhere in this offense. So Tank Dell, we know he's a deep ball threat. We know he's got that great yard after catch ability, and this week versus Tennessee Titan team that's given up a lot of big plays this season. I like Dell to have a decent ball game. Once again, 29, Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. So Tillman's definitely put up numbers for the most part over the last month of the season. I know last week was a down game, 7.70 fantasy points. And Tillman, he's the number 2 option in this wide receiver room, I believe, behind Jerry Jeudy. And Tillman, the only thing is with him, a lot of garbage time is where he got his fantasy points, where he would get off to a slow start, and then where Winston and the Browns had to throw the whole second half is where his points were coming in. So this week versus Steelers, it could be a similar situation. But like I said, I believe Jerry Jeudy's this number 1 option right now in the passing game. 30, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. It's been a down year for DJ Moore, and he's had 12 or less fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games with less than double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. So this week, a tougher matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, one of the better defenses in the league. And Caleb Williams, he just hasn't been good over the last month of the season, and this whole offense has taken a hit for the worse over there in Chicago. So this week versus Minnesota, I don't believe it's a high ceiling for DJ Moore. 31, Quentin Johnston, Los Angeles Chargers. So 3 weeks in a row, he's found the end zone, is Quentin Johnston. Last week, he got more targets coming his way. Him and Ladd McConkey, the only 2 wide receivers pretty much on this roster that are going to get targets and make plays. And this week, in a potential high-scoring game with the Baltimore Ravens coming to town, I think Quentin Johnston could go out there once again and be a sneaky play. 32, Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. So him or Hunter Henry are either the number one option in this passing game for this New England Patriot team. So 3 out of 4 games, double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues here for Demario Douglas. Him and Drake May are definitely building a rapport. And this is going to be a ball game where they're most likely trailing early and often is this New England Patriot team where they got no choice but to throw the football 35, 40 times. So Douglas, he might work his way into production. He's a good slot receiver, and he's got good yard after catch ability as well. 33, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. So last week he put on a big performance, Christian Watson, including a 60-yard catch and a 50-yard catch. So we know a few years ago in his rookie year, he broke out in the second half, had some monster ball games, Christian Watson, and we know he's still one of the more explosive wide receivers in the league in deep ball threat. So this week versus San Francisco, potential high-scoring game in Lambeau Field. We'll see if Christian Watson could go out there once again, have a big game. 34, Jacoby Myers of Las Vegas Raiders. So Myers, he's definitely lower on my list than most likely most people would think. But this week it's a tough matchup at the Denver Broncos. Patrick Surtain's covering him. He's one of the best, if not the best corner in all pro football, which I think he's the best cornerback in pro football. And this Bronco defense is vicious. They don't give up a lot of yards through the air, and especially versus a defense like this, I don't see Jacoby Myers doing much. We saw Drake London last week. He was bottled up, and his numbers weren't great. 35, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. So last week, a big game it was for Xavier Worthy. He did most of his damage in the first half of that ball game at the Buffalo Bills. So Worthy getting a little bit more into the offense with this Kansas City Chief team. And really the only competition in that receiver room is DeAndre Hopkins. I know Juju Smith-Schuster returned, but obviously he's not 100% coming off the hamstring injury. And Worthy, they just got to use him in ways to get him the ball in space. And with his speed, he could burn pretty much anybody, is Xavier Worthy. So this week in a great matchup with the Panthers, it wouldn't be surprising if he goes out there, has a decent game once again, in the 36 and final receiver rankings. Wan'Dale Robinson, the New York Giants. So Wan'Dale Robinson, we'll see how he does with Tommy DeVito in their quarterback. But obviously last season Wan'Dale played with Tommy DeVito after he came in where Tyrod Taylor got banged up, and then they went to DeVito as the quarterback. And DeVito, he had some decent games. Him and Robinson connected a little bit at times. And Robinson, he's a speedy wide receiver and a possession receiver for the most part. So that underneath routes is what he runs, those slants, those little cut and out routes. And this week versus Tampa Bay, not a great secondary. I think Robinson could surprise a bit and be a usable option with 6 teams on bye. So that's the top 36 receivers I'm ranking for week 12 of the fantasy football season.